So the fan base is really fed up with the head coach and the general manager. Again, Albert Breer, on if Kevin Stefanski would get a coaching job elsewhere if he was let go by the Browns.
I think there's a really good shot at it, yeah. Like, I think he's still very well respected across the NFL, and I think he would, at the very least, be interviewed in multiple places. Now, it can be kind of unpredictable. Remember, like, Mike Vrabel, his first offseason after he got fired struck out, which I don't think very many people anticipated. So sometimes it can be, about certain things lining up the right way. So I don't know if I guarantee anything, but I would say a better chance than not based on the candidate pool that he would get one.
Is that just because the candidate pool right now doesn't seem very impressive?
That's part of it. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, I sort of look at it now. I'm not sure there's anybody who's a slam dunk out there to get one.
So I would ask you, Sam, do you think, because the fans here are convinced he would not. I tend to think he would. Do you think he gets another head coaching job if he's let go here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with Bert. I think immediately he would be interviewed by pretty much everybody. Whether or not he would actually end up landing one of those spots, as he says, is always a bit tricky. And there are times where you think it's a slam dunk and it doesn't happen. But I think Stefanski is still viewed as an extremely good head coach. Like, he didn't go from being a coach of the year to being an idiot overnight just because the situation in Cleveland is now bad. They made what is arguably the single worst personnel move in NFL history, and that set the roster back years. And I don't mean to say that Stefanski is blameless for current problems. Like, a guy who's an offensive-minded head coach and a play caller giving up play calling duties 2 years in a row, it's not a good look. Whether or not you think it's a good thing for the team during the season, it's a bad look to be like, I need to step aside for this team to get better for 2 consecutive years. But I think overall, this is still a guy that's an extremely good head coach. And if the roster was in better shape, if they had any kind of answer at quarterback, we would be talking about Stefanski in much different terms. Yeah,
the other thing that comes to mind is it was 3 wins last year. Right now it's 2. How many coaches can say it's 4 or 5 wins? How many coaches can survive 8 wins in 2 years?
Yeah, the problem is you have to assess from an organizational standpoint, like, what is the reason for this? It's easy to just say, look, once you get a certain number of wins or a certain number of losses in a given time period, well, now we just have to fire somebody. But if you look at the way that it's gone, and it all traces back to that Deshaun Watson trade, and you say, well, is it fair? If it all stems back from this, is it fair to, make Kevin Stefanski walk the plank over what was a personnel decision and really hamstrung the roster? And I think if you conclude that that's the reason, this all goes back to the Deshaun Watson trade, then I think you look at this and say, well, would you have expected Stefanski to do any dramatically different, given the fact that this guy has been a complete disaster at quarterback? I think the answer to that is probably no. So if you're being honest and looking at this and assessing from an internal self-scouting point of view, do we think we have smart, capable people in these positions, and what do we attribute the failure to? If you trace it all back to, like, basically one mistake, right? We swung for the fences, we really went for this one, and we missed. But that doesn't mean the guy at bat is bad at his job. It means, one mistake is one mistake. We still think they're the right people to put it back together again.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fair. And you know what? Browns fans wanted him to swing for the fences.
Right.
The problem is, this is what happens when you swing for the fences and you don't hit the ball at all.
Agreed. I mean, that's the thing. They took the biggest swing possible and they missed. And look, I think it's also a perfectly reasonable argument to say that's a fireable offense. Like, that miss on its own is enough to get you marched out of the building and frog marched out of here. But I think it's also reasonable to make the opposite case and say, everyone can swing and miss. That's not like, the Michael Jordan line about he's missed more game-winning shots than anybody else in history. That's not the important thing. The important thing is, what do you do the next one, and what do you do to get back from that, and how do you get better at the other end? you know, that's the decision that Haslam has to make. Do I think that these two guys are still smart, still capable, and overall making a lot of good decisions, even if they also were part of this complete catastrophe in Deshaun Watson? If he believes that's true, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, you know, this year is basically this is a sacrificial year. It was never going to be successful. We drafted a couple of young quarterbacks just to see if one of them is going to be better than we think they will. But next year is when we're actually targeting this. That's why we've got multiple first-round draft picks. You know, 2026 is the year that this is going to start moving in a really positive direction.